The parking lot count. Chapter 1: The empty lot. The sun had set nearly an hour ago. The last customer's car pulled out of the parking lot at 9:17 p.m., its red taillights fading as it turned onto the main road. The shopping center was closed now. All the stores were dark except for the faint security lights that remained on through the night. Gregory arrived in his small gray sedan. He parked in the employee section, near the back of the lot where the asphalt met a line of low shrubs. He turned off his engine and sat for a moment. The silence was pleasant after a day of noise. He stepped out of his car and stretched his arms above his head. The night air was cool but not cold. Gregory was wearing his usual work clothes, khaki pants, a navy blue shirt with the company logo, and comfortable walking shoes. He had been doing this job for 3 years now. From the trunk of his car, he removed a folding table. It was lightweight aluminum with plastic legs that clicked into place. Next came a folding chair of similar design. He set these up near his parking spot, positioning them under one of the lot's tall light poles. Gregory returned to his car and gathered the rest of his supplies. A small desk lamp with a flexible neck. A clipboard with several sheets of paper attached. A pencil case containing 3 sharpened pencils and an eraser. And finally, a blue notebook with the words, "Parking lot count," written neatly on the cover. He arranged everything on the folding table. The lamp went on the left side, angled to illuminate his workspace without shining in his eyes. The clipboard was positioned in the center. The pencil case sat open on the right. The notebook was placed beside the clipboard, closed for now. Gregory plugged the lamp into a small portable battery pack. When he switched it on, a circle of warm light appeared on the table. The surrounding darkness seemed to deepen by contrast. He sat down in the folding chair and opened the notebook. Inside were pages of numbers and notes from previous counts. Gregory flipped to a blank page and wrote the date at the top. Below that, he wrote the time, 9:30 p.m. The parking lot was divided into sections. Each section had rows, and each row had numbered spaces. Gregory's job was to count every space and record whether it was empty or occupied. The management used this information to analyze parking patterns and plan for future needs. He picked up the clipboard. The top sheet was a map of the parking lot with all the sections clearly marked. Gregory had made the map himself when he first started this job. It was detailed and precise, showing exactly 317 parking spaces in total. From his shirt pocket, Gregory took out a small digital counter. He reset it to 0 with a click. Then he stood up, tucked the clipboard under his arm, and picked up a flashlight from the table. It was time to begin his count. Chapter 2: The First Row. Gregory started at the far left corner of the main lot. This was Section A, the area closest to the grocery store. During business hours, it was usually the most crowded section. Now it was nearly empty. He walked slowly along the first row. The parking spaces were marked with white paint that glowed faintly under the lot lights. Each space was numbered. Gregory stopped at space A1 and made a mark on his clipboard. Empty. His shoes made a soft scraping sound against the asphalt. It was the loudest noise in the quiet lot. Far away, he could hear the occasional car passing on the highway, but that sound was distant and unimportant. Space A2 was also empty. Gregory made another mark. The cool night air felt pleasant on his face as he walked. There was no hurry. The entire night shift stretched ahead of him, and the count was only one of his duties. In Space A3, there was a small blue car. Gregory noted this on his clipboard. He didn't need to know who owned the car or why it was there after hours. He only needed to count. The car belonged to one of the cleaning staff, he assumed. Gregory continued down the row. A4, empty. A5, empty. A6, empty. Each space received the same careful attention. Each mark on his clipboard was made with precision. The repetitive nature of the task was soothing. When he reached the end of the first row, Gregory paused and looked back. 10 spaces in total, 9 of them empty. He made a note of this at the bottom of the section on his clipboard. The second row was completely empty. Gregory walked its length at the same unhurried pace, marking each space as he passed it. His flashlight beam swept over the clean asphalt, revealing small details, a discarded receipt, a lost coin, the faded line of parking space paint that would need to be refreshed soon. Gregory made a note about the paint. It wasn't part of his counting job, but he liked to report maintenance issues when he noticed them. The management appreciated his attention to detail. The third row had 2 cars. One was a red pickup truck in Space A21. The other was a white sedan in Space A26. Gregory recognized the sedan as belonging to the night manager of the grocery store. The truck was unfamiliar. Row by row, Gregory worked his way through Section A. There were 60 spaces in total, and tonight only 4 of them were occupied. This was typical for this time of night on a Tuesday. Gregory had been doing this job long enough to know the patterns. When he finished Section A, Gregory returned to his table and sat down. He opened the blue notebook and transferred his count from the clipboard, 56 empty spaces, 4 occupied. The numbers were written in neat columns. Gregory had clear handwriting that was easy to read. He took a moment to rest before moving on to Section B. The night was still young, and there was no need to rush. Gregory enjoyed the peaceful rhythm of his work. Chapter 3: The Far Side. After completing the count for Sections A and B, Gregory walked toward the far side of the parking lot. This area, designated as Section C, was the farthest from the main building. The light poles were spaced wider apart here, creating pools of illumination with darker areas between them. Section C was where employees were supposed to park during business hours. Now, at night, it was mostly empty. Gregory's footsteps echoed slightly as he walked across the open space. The sound didn't travel far, absorbed by the night air. The first row of Section C had 15 spaces, all empty except for Space C8, which held a small motorcycle covered with a weatherproof tarp. Gregory made the appropriate marks on his clipboard. The motorcycle had been there for 3 nights now. There was nothing unusual about this. Sometimes employees left vehicles overnight. A light breeze moved across the lot, carrying the scent of the nearby trees. The shopping center was bordered on one side by a small wooded area. During autumn, leaves would scatter across the pavement, but tonight the lot was clean. Gregory moved to the second row of Section C. As he approached Space C17, something moved in his peripheral vision. He turned his head slowly and saw a cat, gray with white paws, sitting at the edge of the parking space. The cat watched him with calm yellow eyes. "Hello," Gregory said quietly. His voice sounded flat in the open space. The cat blinked once, then stood and stretched. Gregory continued his count, marking space C17 as empty. When he looked again, the cat was gone, vanished into the shadows between cars. The encounter was brief and ordinary. Gregory had seen many cats in the parking lot over the years. Some lived in the wooded area nearby. Others were probably strays from the surrounding neighborhood. They never bothered him, and he never bothered them. He finished counting the second row and moved to the third. Each space received the same careful attention as all the others. Gregory's pace remained unhurried. The night stretched around him, cool and quiet. The distant sound of the highway had faded to almost nothing. In the fourth row, spaces C46 through C50 were occupied by a line of identical white vans. These belonged to the floral delivery service that operated from one of the smaller stores in the shopping center. They always parked in the same spaces, 5 vans in a neat row. Gregory counted each van individually, marking each space as occupied. It would have been easier to simply write 5 vans on his clipboard, but that wasn't the procedure. Each space needed its own mark. Gregory was thorough in his work. When he finished section C, he stood at the very edge of the parking lot. From this vantage point, he could see the entire shopping center, the dark storefronts, the empty spaces, the few scattered cars. The scene was peaceful in its ordinariness. Gregory checked his watch. It was 10:45 p.m. The count was proceeding at a normal pace. He turned and began walking toward the overflow lot, which was separated from the main lot by a narrow access road. As he walked, he reviewed the numbers in his head. So far, he had counted 140 spaces in the main lot, with 16 of them occupied. This was slightly below average for a Tuesday night. Gregory would include this observation in his final report. Chapter 4: The Overflow Lot. The overflow lot was smaller than the main parking area. It contained only 50 spaces, arranged in 5 neat rows of 10. During the holiday shopping season, this lot would fill to capacity. On summer weekends, it might be half full. Tonight, it was nearly empty. A narrow strip of grass separated the overflow lot from the access road. The grass was trimmed short and even. Gregory stepped carefully over this strip and entered the overflow lot, which was designated as Section D on his map. The lighting here was different from the main lot. Instead of tall poles, there were shorter fixtures with warmer bulbs. The effect was slightly softer, creating less stark shadows between the parked cars. Gregory began his count with the first row. D1, empty. D2, empty. D3, occupied by a black SUV. D4, empty. He moved from space to space with the same methodical pace he had maintained all evening. There was comfort in the routine. From the direction of the highway came the low rumble of a passing truck. The sound rose slightly in volume, then faded away. Gregory barely noticed it. The background noise of distant traffic was as much a part of his work environment as the painted lines in asphalt. In the second row, spaces D11 through D15 were occupied by a group of cars that Gregory recognized. They belonged to the staff of the restaurant on the corner of the shopping center. The restaurant closed at 10 p.m., but the cleaning crew usually worked until around midnight. Gregory made the appropriate marks on his clipboard. 5 spaces occupied, 5 empty in that row. The information was simple but necessary. The property management company used these counts to analyze usage patterns and make decisions about lot maintenance and security. As he moved to the 3rd row, Gregory noticed a small puddle near space D21. It hadn't rained recently, so this was likely leaked fluid from a vehicle. He made a note on his clipboard, recording the location and approximate size of the puddle. The maintenance team would need to apply absorbent material in the morning. The rest of the 3rd row was empty. Gregory walked its length, making marks on his clipboard. The repetitive motion of walking, stopping, marking, and continuing had a rhythm to it. Gregory found it calming. There was a satisfaction in completing a simple task thoroughly. In the 4th row, there was only one occupied space, D36, which held a compact red car. Gregory didn't recognize this vehicle. It might belong to a customer who had left it overnight, or perhaps to someone visiting one of the apartment buildings across the street. The 5th and final row of the overflow lot was completely empty. Gregory walked slowly past each space, marking them one by one. When he reached the end of the row, he stopped and looked back across the lot. From this vantage point, he could see all 50 spaces and the 7 vehicles currently occupying them. Gregory checked his clipboard to ensure his count was accurate. Section D, 43 empty spaces, 7 occupied. The numbers matched what he could see. He made a final note about the condition of the lot: clean, well-lit, no significant issues apart from the small fluid leak near D21. With the overflow lot completed, Gregory had now counted all 317 spaces in the entire parking area. He turned and began walking back toward his folding table, where he would review and compile his numbers. The night was still young. It was only 11:20 p.m., and his shift would continue until 6 a.m. After completing the count, he would make regular patrol rounds of the property, checking that all doors remained secure and no issues had arisen. Gregory enjoyed the quiet hours of his night shift. There was a peacefulness to the empty parking lot that few people ever experienced. To him, it wasn't lonely. It was simply calm. Chapter 5: Reviewing the Numbers. Gregory returned to his folding table, carefully balancing the clipboard in one hand. The small lamp cast a warm circle of light on the table surface, creating a quiet workspace in the vast, empty parking lot. He pulled his chair closer to the table and sat down with a soft sigh. The plastic seat creaked slightly under his weight. The blue notebook lay open to the page where he had started recording tonight's count. Gregory placed the clipboard beside it and removed his pen from his shirt pocket. It was a simple ballpoint pen with blue ink, nothing fancy. Gregory preferred blue ink for his records. It was easier to read than black, especially under the limited light of his lamp. He began transferring the numbers from his clipboard to the notebook. First, he wrote the heading, Section A, in neat, even letters. Beneath this, he created 2 columns, empty and occupied. In the first column, he wrote 56 and in the second, 4. His handwriting was clean and precise, each number written with careful attention. The process continued for each section. Section B, 68 empty, 12 occupied. Section C, 71 empty, 14 occupied. Section D, 43 empty, 7 occupied. Gregory added up the totals at the bottom of the page: 238 empty spaces, 37 occupied spaces. Together, they equaled 275 spaces. Gregory paused, tapping his pen against the notebook. Something wasn't right. He knew the parking lot contained exactly 317 spaces in total. His count showed only 275. He had missed 42 spaces somehow. There was no need to rush or worry. Gregory had encountered such discrepancies before. He turned to the map of the parking lot that he kept in the front of his notebook. Running his finger along the sections, he realized his mistake. He had forgotten to count Section E, the small employee parking area behind the restaurant. Gregory made a note of this oversight but did not hurry to correct it. Section E would still be there when he finished his current task. First, he wanted to compare tonight's numbers with previous nights. He flipped back through the pages of his notebook, finding last Tuesday's count. The numbers were similar: 233 empty spaces, 42 occupied spaces on that night. This week showed a slight decrease in occupancy, which was normal for this time of year. The weather had been cooler lately, which typically meant fewer evening shoppers. Gregory turned to the page for the Tuesday before that. The pattern continued: 236 empty, 39 occupied. The consistency of the numbers was satisfying. It suggested that his counting was accurate and that the parking patterns were stable. From his backpack, which sat on the ground beside his chair, Gregory removed a small thermos. He unscrewed the cap, which doubled as a cup, and poured some warm tea into it. The gentle aroma of chamomile rose into the cool night air. Gregory took a small sip before setting the cup on the table, careful to place it away from his notebook and clipboard. While drinking his tea, Gregory continued reviewing his notes. He flipped to a section at the back of the notebook where he tracked maintenance issues. Last week, he had noted a flickering light in Section C. Tonight, he observed that the light had been repaired. He made a note of this, drawing a line through the previous entry. He also added a new note about the fluid leak in space D21. This was presented as a simple fact, not a concern or problem. Gregory's notes were always neutral in tone, focusing on observation rather than judgment. The night air had grown slightly cooler. Gregory zipped up his light jacket without interrupting his work. He was accustomed to the gradual temperature changes that occurred during his shift. The cooling air was just another part of the familiar pattern of the night. Returning to the current count, Gregory noticed that he had written 9 instead of 6 for occupied spaces in row C3. He took an eraser from his pencil case and carefully removed the incorrect number. Then he wrote 6 in its place, making sure the new number was clear and properly aligned with the other figures. Gregory finished his tea while continuing to review the numbers. Every so often, he would glance up at the parking lot, taking in the peaceful scene. The few cars remained undisturbed. The lights hummed softly. Nothing moved except for the occasional gentle stirring of leaves when a light breeze passed through. Once his review was complete, Gregory closed the notebook temporarily. He still needed to count Section E, but first, he would take a short break. He stood up and stretched his arms above his head, feeling the pleasant release of tension in his shoulders. The shopping center was entirely quiet now. Even the distant highway sounds had diminished as the hour grew later. It was nearly midnight, the time when Gregory usually ate his small meal. From his backpack, he took out a plastic container with a sandwich and a small apple. He ate slowly, chewing each bite thoroughly. The sandwich was ham and cheese on whole wheat bread, simple and satisfying. Gregory didn't need elaborate meals during his shift. The apple was crisp and slightly tart, a nice contrast to the sandwich. While eating, Gregory let his gaze wander over the parking lot. The pattern of light and shadow was familiar and calming. He had been working this same shift for 3 years now, and the routine was comfortable. Some might find the job monotonous, but Gregory appreciated its predictability and the quiet time it gave him to think. After finishing his meal, Gregory wiped his hands with a paper napkin and took a few sips of water from a bottle he kept in his backpack. He was ready to continue with his count. He picked up his clipboard and pen, stood up, and prepared to walk to Section E. Before leaving his table, Gregory made sure everything was in order. The notebook was closed to protect the pages from any breeze. The thermos was resealed. The remains of his meal were packed away in a small plastic bag that he would dispose of later. With a final glance at his workspace, Gregory stepped away from the circle of lamplight and began walking toward the restaurant building. His pace was unhurried. The night was still young, and Section E was a small area, only 42 spaces in total. There was plenty of time to complete the count accurately. Chapter 6: The Final Check. After counting Section E, Gregory returned to his table and added the numbers to his notebook. Section E had 35 empty spaces and 7 occupied spaces, bringing the total count to 273 empty and 44 occupied. Together, they equaled 317 spaces, which matched the known total for the entire parking lot. Gregory closed the notebook and set down his pen. The formal count was now complete, but his routine always included one final check. This was not required by his job description, but Gregory preferred to be thorough. A second walkthrough helped ensure accuracy and gave him a chance to notice anything he might have missed the first time. He stood up from his chair, picked up his flashlight, and adjusted his jacket. The time was 12:37 a.m. The night was still and quiet, the parking lot peaceful under the steady glow of the light poles. Gregory decided to take a different route for his final check, walking the perimeter of the lot first and then crossing through the middle sections. He began at the corner nearest his table, walking along the edge of Section A. His footsteps were quiet but not deliberately silent. There was no need to move stealthily. He was supposed to be visible, a sign that the property was monitored even in the late hours. The perimeter of the parking lot was marked by a low concrete curb. Beyond this, there was a narrow strip of landscaping, small shrubs, decorative stones, and in some areas, young trees. Gregory walked just inside this boundary, his flashlight beam occasionally sweeping across the plantings to check for anything unusual. There was never anything to find, but the routine was comforting. When he reached the corner of Section B, Gregory paused to look back across the lot. From this angle, he could see most of the parked cars. Their shapes were familiar: the line of delivery vans in Section C, the restaurant staff cars in Section D, the few scattered vehicles elsewhere. Everything matched his count. He continued along the perimeter, moving at a steady pace. The concrete curb was broken at regular intervals by drainage channels. Gregory noted that one of these channels was partially blocked by leaves and small debris. It wasn't a serious issue, but he would mention it in his maintenance notes. As he walked, Gregory mentally reviewed the numbers from his count. The occupancy pattern was typical for a Tuesday night. Weekends were busier, especially during the day. Monday mornings were always quiet. These patterns had become familiar to Gregory over his years of work. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing the rhythms of the place. When he reached Section C, Gregory adjusted his route to walk through the rows of parking spaces. This was where he had seen the gray cat earlier. There was no sign of it now. Animals came and went in the parking lot, mainly at night when there were fewer people around. Occasionally Gregory would see rabbits or raccoons, but they kept their distance. The delivery vans in Section C were identical, white with the floral company's logo painted on the sides. Gregory paused briefly to check if the number of vans matched his count. There were 5, just as he had recorded. He continued walking, moving between the rows of empty spaces. The light poles created pools of illumination with darker areas between them. Gregory's flashlight provided additional light when needed. He wasn't looking for anything specific during this final check. It was more about ensuring that the overall sense of the lot matched what he had recorded in his notebook. In Section D, the overflow lot, Gregory noticed something he had missed earlier. A car that he had counted in space D36 was actually parked slightly over the line, encroaching on space D37. This didn't change the total count. It was still one car, but it meant his specific assignment of spaces was incorrect. Gregory made a small note on his clipboard to adjust this in his records. It was a minor detail, but he preferred to be precise. He continued through the overflow lot, checking each row against his memory of the count. When he reached the row with the fluid leak in space D21, Gregory stopped to examine it more closely. The puddle was small, about the size of his hand. It appeared to be oil, dark and slightly iridescent under his flashlight beam. The maintenance team would need to apply absorbent material to clean it up. Gregory made a more detailed note about the leak, estimating its size and location more precisely. This kind of attention to detail was part of what made him good at his job. Property management relied on his observations to maintain the parking lot effectively. After finishing his check of Section D, Gregory walked to Section E behind the restaurant. This area was slightly different from the others. The spaces were narrower, designed for employee parking rather than customer vehicles. The lighting was also different, with wall-mounted fixtures rather than pole lights. The 7 occupied spaces in Section E contained a mix of vehicles, compact cars, a small pickup truck, and a motorcycle. Gregory confirmed that his count matched what he was seeing. Everything was in order. With the final check complete, Gregory began making his way back to his table. He took a different route this time, cutting diagonally across the main lot. The asphalt was smooth beneath his feet, with occasional rough patches where repairs had been made. Gregory knew every inch of this parking lot, its textures and patterns as familiar as those of his own home. The night remained peaceful. In the distance, the faint sound of a train whistle could be heard, so distant that it was barely noticeable. Gregory checked his watch, 1:15 a.m. The final check had taken about 40 minutes, which was typical. He maintained an unhurried pace in all his tasks. As he approached his table, Gregory noticed that the breeze had picked up slightly. A few sheets of paper on his clipboard ruffled softly. He quickened his steps slightly, not wanting his notes to be disturbed. Back at his table, Gregory sat down and opened his notebook again. He made the correction about spaces D36 and D37, carefully erasing the previous entry and writing the new information. He also added a note about the blocked drainage channel and provided more details about the oil leak. The rest of his count remained unchanged. The final numbers were still 273 empty spaces and 44 occupied spaces, for a total of 317. Gregory was satisfied with the accuracy of his work. The parking lot count was complete for another night. Chapter 7: Closing the Notebook. With all the numbers checked and verified, Gregory began the process of closing out his task. He turned to the last page of his notes for the night and wrote a brief summary. Tuesday, May 6th. Normal occupancy patterns. No significant issues. Oil leak in D21 requires cleaning. His summary was always concise, focusing on the essential information. Gregory didn't include his personal observations or feelings. The management wasn't interested in those aspects. They wanted clear, factual data about the parking lot. Gregory read over his notes one final time, checking for any errors or omissions. Finding none, he carefully closed the blue notebook. The cover was slightly worn at the corners from regular use. Gregory had been using this same notebook for about 3 months now. When it was full, he would start a new one, but this one still had many blank pages remaining. He placed the notebook in his backpack, sliding it into the dedicated pocket where he always kept it. Next, he collected the papers from his clipboard, organizing them into a neat stack. These would be filed in the security office at the end of his shift. Gregory clipped them together with a small binder clip to keep them tidy. The temperature had dropped another few degrees. Gregory could see his breath forming small clouds in the air when he exhaled. He zipped his jacket up to the collar and put on a pair of thin gloves that he kept in his pocket. The cold didn't bother him. It was just another condition to be noted and accommodated. Gregory unplugged his small lamp from the portable battery pack. The circle of warm light vanished, leaving only the more distant illumination from the parking lot lights. He carefully wound the lamp's cord and stored it in his backpack along with the battery pack. The folding table was next. Gregory removed everything from its surface and collapsed it, folding the legs underneath and securing them with the built-in clips. The table became a flat, portable rectangle that he could easily carry to his car. He did the same with the folding chair, collapsing it into its closed position. The plastic and metal frame made a soft clicking sound as it folded. Gregory held the chair in one hand and the table in the other, leaving his backpack on the ground for the moment. He walked to his car and opened the trunk using his key. The interior light came on, creating a small pool of illumination in the darkness. Gregory placed the folding table and chair inside, positioning them carefully so they wouldn't shift during the drive home. He closed the trunk with a gentle push, not wanting to make any more noise than necessary in the quiet night. Returning to his previous spot, Gregory picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. He did a final visual check of the area to ensure he hadn't left anything behind. The asphalt where his table had been was empty now, indistinguishable from the rest of the parking lot. Gregory took his car keys from his pocket and held them loosely in his hand. He wasn't quite ready to leave yet. Part of his routine was to take a moment at the end of the count to simply observe the parking lot. He stood still, letting his gaze move slowly across the familiar landscape. The night was clear, with a few stars visible despite the light pollution from the city. The parking lot stretched out before him, a grid of white lines on dark asphalt, punctuated by the scattered vehicles he had counted earlier. The scene was ordinary but had its own kind of beauty in its orderliness and quiet. Gregory had been doing this job for 3 years, but he still found satisfaction in these moments of stillness. The parking lot was different at night than during the day. Most people never saw it like this, empty and peaceful. Gregory felt a mild sense of privilege at being one of the few who experienced this space in its quietest hours. After a few minutes of observation, Gregory turned toward his car. It was time to continue with the rest of his shift duties. The parking lot count was complete, but he still needed to make regular security rounds of the property throughout the night. He unlocked his car and placed his backpack on the passenger seat. He wouldn't be driving yet. His car was just a convenient place to store his things between tasks. Gregory took out a different notebook, this one for recording his security observations, and a fresh pen. Before closing the car door, Gregory checked his watch again, 1:42 a.m. He was right on schedule. The night stretched ahead of him, predictable and calm. He would make his first security round at 2 a.m., checking that all the store doors were secure and that nothing was amiss on the property. Gregory closed the car door quietly and began walking toward the main building of the shopping center. The parking lot was behind him now, its count completed for another night. Tomorrow, he would do it all again. The numbers would be slightly different, but the process would be the same. As he walked, Gregory's thoughts were already turning to his next task. Each part of his job had its own rhythm and routine. He moved through them with the same careful attention he had given to counting the parking spaces. There was no hurry, no anxiety. Just the quiet progression of tasks through the night hours. The door to the security office was located at the back of the main building. Gregory unlocked it with his key and stepped inside. The small room contained a desk, a computer, and a row of filing cabinets. Gregory would return here at the end of his shift to file his reports and hand over to the morning staff. For now, though, his work continued outside, in the quiet spaces of the shopping center. Gregory closed the office door behind him and walked back into the night. The parking lot was visible from here, its familiar pattern of lights and shadows unchanged. Gregory turned his attention to the building perimeter, beginning his security check with steady, unhurried steps. The night continued, calm and uneventful. The counted parking lot remained still, its empty spaces and occasional vehicles resting quietly under the steady glow of the light poles. Everything was in its place, accounted for, and noted in Gregory's careful records. Tomorrow would bring new numbers, but the same peaceful routine. And Gregory wouldn't have it any other way.